I think the first, because I shared the book already, it's called The Age of Influence. So how did you name, because I'm sure naming a book is such a big thing. Why did you, and I'm sure there was a deep reason behind why you named it that. Why did you call it The Age of Influence? What do you really mean by that? Because the title of this webinar is also, how do you build a brand in the age of influence? We all know what a brand is, but can you define and add a little bit more color to what you mean by the age of influence, and what was the age before this? How have things changed? Can you tell us a little bit more?
Yeah, so to put the book in its context, it was published back in 2020, pretty much when COVID started, if you remember, yeah. So things have progressed since then, but originally the book was really, if you remember the pre-COVID days, this is right before TikTok emerged, when Instagram was still king. Influencers really ruled the algorithms, ruled the timelines. It was very, very hard, and it still is. Situation really hasn't gotten much better for brands, but it's really hard to generate word of mouth and really be heard in social media. So the book actually, for those that might remember, if any of my fans are on this call, it was originally called The Business of Influence. And I actually did a pre-order campaign and it had a different looking cover, which was The Business of Influence, which I wanted people to think of, influencers and business. It wasn't just some random cultural phenomenon that influencers could be leveraged for business means. And it was my publisher, HarperCollins, who said, you know what, we did a survey and we decided that the age of influence has a better chance of selling more books. So in all honesty, that is how the title came about. Either way, I think it really means the same thing, that we really need to think about online media a little bit differently. And, fast forward, I published this book, Behind Me Digital Threads, in October of last year. And, fast forward to where influence marketing is today, yes, there's still things that your business needs. You still need an online presence. You still need to do SEO. You still need to do email marketing, right? But when it comes to social media, I think we're still in this age of influence. And the influence used to be based more on follower count. Today, we know the influence is really based on the content quality, right? More than the follower count, that the views that content generates, regardless if you have a lot or few followers. So that's how far we progressed. But I think that the tenets of the book, being the age of influence, I don't think that's changed. And my advice to businesses really is we need to collaborate more, not just with influencers, now with content creators, right? We changed the language a little bit in 2025.
Yeah.
But really, I believe that social media, and I wrote about it 5 years ago and I wrote about it last year, it should really be a place to collaborate with other individuals. And I think that's where you're going to find the greatest value.
Love it. So how do brands go about adapting to this age of influence? Are there any mistakes you're seeing them making that they're still not adapting to it? Or how do they go about building a brand for this? How do they go about playing this new game that has happened? Some people might be thinking, well, it was way easier back then. Like in 2015, you could just crank up some Facebook ads. You basically needed no social following and you could just get cheap clicks and, make millions and millions of dollars. But now people don't want that. Like you said, like it's trust-based selling. It is, you want to have as much exposure as possible, both organically and via ads. So how do you go about sort of playing this new game of influencers? Because it's a phase shift in the world of marketing.
Yeah, I think it really begins with a mindset. I'm actually speaking at an event in a few days about the relationship between user-generated content and social media marketing and influence marketing, right? So I think that the first step is the mindset that says, if you want to succeed as a brand in social media, right? We still have other parts of digital marketing, but in where people spend the most time online, if you want to succeed, you need to become a content creator. And that there's just no other way around it with the way that the algorithms work today. You can try to buy as many followers as you want, but the algorithms are not going to share your content unless it is truly offering value to people. And brands are just not wired to do that. The DNA of someone in marketing is to promote, to sell, right? Whereas the content creator thinks very, very differently. They think of adding value, of being relevant, of building community. And this is the same thing that brands need to do, but it's really, really hard to do. Unless maybe if you're a small business and the business owner themselves are very active on social media, or you happen to have a real savvy social media person in your marketing team, there are some outliers, obviously. I think of a brand like Duolingo, right, who have done amazing on TikTok, offering that sort of, in their case, it's an entertainment value. But that's what it requires. And I think that for most businesses, it's really, really hard to do. So what can you do? Well, this is where we talk about leveraging the content of others. So I would begin actually looking at leveraging user generated content. And there's a chapter on this in Digital Threads where basically a quote of mine is, the thought that companies have to produce all of their own content for social media, I think is just wrong. I don't think you have to do it. And I think in many ways, if you're just, promoting yourself to other people, you miss out on the opportunities of developing those relationships. And when I talk about developing relationships, let's forget about influencers now, right? Who is it that already has some, what I call brand affinity? I talk about this in the age of influence, customers, employees, partners, fans, followers, mentioners. Who is it that already has some like, know, and trust with your organization that might already be talking about you in social media? And that's really where we begin. The concept of if there are people talking about us in social media, we can, with permission, start to tap into their content and promote it on our channels, because indirectly that's going to help promote us as well. This is the core, concept of user-generated content. But, the difference between me promoting myself and a third person talking about me, like Yash, when you started this presentation, you began by talking how much the book influenced you. Now, I could have stood here and said, The Age of Influence is best-selling, award-winning. It's launched businesses around the world, but psychologically, it pales in comparison to someone else talking about me. We call that social proof, right? So really what we're trying to do in social media is start to begin that journey in the age of influence by tapping into social proof and tapping into what others are saying about us and really beginning from there. And it's a long journey from there, but this is where we begin to develop these relationships with people that are in our brand affinity circle that are already on social media, hopefully talking about us. And if they're not talking about us, what can we do to get them to talk about us? That would absolutely be where I start today.
Yeah, I definitely want to dive into the second part of what can we do to get them to talk about us. But I want to emphasize again for everyone else here, I think um, just the framing of looking at influence and not influencer is very important, because like Neil said, it could be, you just have to find brand affinity networks. So that those could be teammates, those could be partners, those could be influencers, or those could be customers. There's so many of these channels that you can tap into. You don't have to necessarily focus just on like that big popular influencer that everybody wants, right? Like you'd be surprised how much impact somebody with 5 or 8 or 10,000 followers can have on your company, as opposed to somebody with 100,000 followers.